I'm hoping you got some really good practice with those more basic absolute value equations and that you've got those procedures and those steps to solve an absolute value equation memorized. So let's start off today. We're just going to do these 6 problems here, but let's start off and see if you can fill this in. These are the steps that we take, and again, it's not a huge memorization process. We just practice enough that this kind of just becomes second nature, but it does all have to do with the nature of absolute values. So it says the steps to solve an absolute value equation. We blank the absolute value. Remember, we're going to isolate the absolute value. We can't do the rest of this until we've isolated the absolute value. The second thing, so step number 2, is we're going to break this into 2 cases. So rule 2 has a 2 in it. And when we break it into those 2 cases, what we do is we remove the absolute value. So I'm going to write the word remove. We just take the absolute value off and we solve the equation. And the second thing is we do the same thing. We remove the absolute value, but we make the number on the opposite side the opposite of what it used to be. Okay? And then we solve that. So that's how we're going to do this. We're going to isolate and then we're going to break it into the 2 cases. And remember, when you break it into the 2 cases, the one where we just remove them, that one's going to go on the right. That's going to represent the right direction of absolute value. And the other one, when we make it the opposite, we're going to put that one on the left. That's going to represent the opposite, the negative. That means we're going to the left side of 0 and things like that. So let's go ahead and solve this one right here. You'll notice that it's not isolated, so we need to get this by itself first. So we're going to get rid of that -5. We're going to do that by adding 5. So we're going to get the absolute value of -3 plus x equals, and then -10 plus 5 is -5. And again, bells should be going off. When you get the absolute value isolated, if the other side is negative, remember, absolute value is always going to be positive, or at the very least it's going to be 0. And over here we've got this equation saying that, well, I'm going to end up with a positive over here, but a negative on this side right here. So remember, that can't happen. We are going to have no solution. So we love it when we recognize those. They're very quick. We can just write no solution, then we can keep solving. Now, some people look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, there's a negative over here. There's no way this is going to have an answer. Remember, you can't make that decision. You can't break it into the 2 cases or make decisions about how many answers there are until we have it isolated. This is not isolated yet, so we're going to divide both sides by -4. So this is going to be absolute value of y plus 1 is equal to 7. Notice that it's a positive 7 now, so that negative here took care of that negative over there. Now we can break it into the 2 cases. So I'm going to remove the absolute value and solve. I'm going to remove the absolute value, change that to the opposite sign, and then I'm going to solve that. So here are the 2 cases. I'm going to go ahead and solve each one of these. So I'm going to subtract 1. I get y equals -8. I'm going to circle that. We're going to subtract 1. Again, solving these cases, they're very similar. So we get y over here, and we get 7 minus 1 is 6. So again, notice we get 2 answers, but they're not opposites of each other. One happens to be negative, the other one happens to be positive. But we couldn't get this answer and have it be -8 and just say, oh, I know what this one is over here. It's got to be +8. It doesn't work that way very often. Okay, this one's already isolated. Let's go ahead and do that one. So we're going to break this into 2 cases. 3z plus 5 equals 7. And the other one is going to be 3z plus 5 equals -7. And I'd really like you to focus on, get those cases written down before you start solving. Don't work ahead. Don't get an answer for this one and try and guess what the other one is. It's much better if you break it into the 2 cases and then solve each one of those. So we've got the one on the left with the -7. We've got the one on the right with the +7. And let's go ahead and solve here. So I'm going to subtract 5. So we're going to have 3z equals -12. Divide by 3. And we get z equals -4. That's one of the answers. And then over here, we're going to subtract 5. We get 3z equals 7 minus 5 is 2. Divide by 3. We get z equals 2/3. Very different answers. One of them happens to be a fraction, but we solved that correctly, so we're in good shape. You'll notice that a couple of these have asterisks on them, so we might want to be a little bit careful there. Let's take a look here. We need to isolate here, so we're going to, let's see, add 5. Let's see, that's going to be 10, absolute value of x minus 2. We get a 20 over here. I think the reason this has an asterisk is this is going to take a couple of steps to get there. We've got to get rid of the 10. It's still not isolated. So we're going to divide both sides by 10. So we get absolute value of x minus 2. Make that a little bit longer. And 20 divided by 10 is 2. And then we can break it up. So we've got x minus 2 is equal to 2. And x minus 2 is equal to negative 2. Again, we're just going to add 2 all over the place. I'll solve these at the same time. So we get happens to be x equals 0 on this one right here. Those cancel each other, and this one happens to be 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay, so again, two totally different answers on that one. Let's take a look at this one here. It's not isolated yet, so these are stuck together through that multiplication and the parentheses, if you will, with the absolute value. So we're going to subtract 3. So negative 2, m minus 6 in absolute value. 3 minus 3 is 0. Still not isolated, so I'm going to divide by negative 2. So I get absolute value of m minus 6 is equal to, remember those rules with 0. You can't divide by 0, but it's totally okay to take 0 and divide it by another number. 0 divided by 2 is still going to be 0. And again, if you think of this as positive divided by a negative, 0 doesn't have a sign, so there's no plus or minus here or anything like that. And remember, this is one of those special cases. There's no such thing as negative 0 or positive 0, so we've got m minus 6 is equal to 0 if you wanted to write that. And m minus 6 is equal to negative 0. Those are both the same thing. So I'm not going to worry about both of them. I'm just going to solve one of them, and I'm going to add 6 here. So we get m equals, this would be 6 right there. So the answer on that one is m equals 6. There's only one answer because it was absolute value of this stuff equals 0. There's only one way we can get that to work out. And then here's one more. We're going to subtract 4. Absolute value of 6 minus 10n is equal to, that's going to be a 6. We're going to break that into two cases. So 6 minus 10n equals 6. And the other one is 6 minus 10n equals negative 6. We'll go ahead and solve this. Subtract 6. Negative 10n equals, that's negative 12. Divide by negative 10. Those are going to cancel. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, and then 10 doesn't go into 12 evenly, so let's think of that as a fraction. 12 over 10. 2 would go into both of those. It would go in here 6 times and in here 5 times. So this one is n is equal to 6/5. And then on this one, let's subtract 6 and subtract 6. Negative 10n, this is a 0. Divide by negative 10. Once you get these figured out with 0, it's actually kind of nice when you have something like this, because the only way that can be 0 is if n is 0. So there we go. No solution. 2 answers here, 2 answers here, 2 answers here, 1 answer there because it was set equal to 0, and then 2 kind of ugly answers on that one. So we do have to be a little bit careful. Now I'm gonna just stop right here. You've got enough information that you can do the absolute value equations in this section. I'm going to change colors right here, and we're just going to look at this brain challenge here. Remember, you cannot forget how to solve problems like this. So I'm going to give you just a second. I challenge you to do this. It doesn't take very long, but if you did well in the last unit on solving equations, you should be in good shape here. Pause it for a second, do this problem, and then I'm going to go ahead and do it right now. All right, we do need to combine these, so we have negative 2r, or sorry, negative 9r plus 7r, that's negative 2r plus 3. And then over on this side, we're going to distribute through, so this is negative 2r, this is going to be minus 12, and then plus 15. So we get negative 2r plus 3, and then we'd combine these guys right here, negative 2r, and this would be plus 3. At this point, you could stop and you could know what the answer is, because negative 2r plus 3 equals negative 2r plus 3. There's nothing we can do to mess that up, so this is going to be infinitely many solutions. All right. If you did want to cross off those and get 3 equals 3, there's nothing we can do to mess that up, so definitely infinitely many solutions here. All right.